Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the inaugural session of the annual OASC Open Agile Smart Cities event for members, for partners, for the community, for actually anyone who's interested in the digital agenda seen from the ground. My name is Martin Brunschgau. I'm the chair of Open Agile Smart Cities, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you here today. So we will start the whole event, which is called C by C Festival, and has 21 sessions, of which this is the first, focusing on local data spaces. And we will have 90 minutes to discuss, well, how data, which is the foundation of everything we do in the digital transformation, how we get that right, how that is becoming the basis of decisions. That could be personal decisions as a citizen, it could be legal decisions by authorities on any level. It could be, well, decisions made by autonomous systems. I mean, cars, any system we can think of within the electricity grid. So when our fridge is trying to find green energy, it could be within securing the integrity of ourselves so we understand where our data goes. So all of these things, with all the actors around the multi-helix. So whether it's the buying or selling side of the market, it's the regulators, or it's the broader civil society perspective, or even the well, physical environment itself as an actor. So it's my great pleasure to welcome our roster of speakers here today. Andrea Halmos from the European Commission. Hello, Andrea. We have Andrea Lampe from Slovenia and ICT Slovenia, and from Gaia-X. We have Ulrich Ahle from the Fireware Foundation, and we have Lodewijk. Can we see you, Lodewijk, from Eurocities? So I would invite you now, everyone, to lean back and enjoy. I'll remind everyone that the session is being recorded. So that's for your information and action, if you will. It also means that by the generosity of the speakers and the people who intervene here, everything will also be available online later, including the slides. So you don't have to worry, and you don't have to ask frantically if the slides will be shared. Yes, they will be shared, and it will be documented as soon as possible on the website, which is oascities.org. So welcome, everyone. Please use the Q&A to ask questions. And I said we have plenty of time. It's an interactive dialogue around how we take the next steps in organizing data so it becomes actionable and, again, as seen from the ground where we all stand. So Andrea, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for joining us. And I suggest that we close our videos and leave the floor to the speaker until we open the panel. Andrea.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. It is really a great pleasure to be in the first session and be the first speaker to set the scene on local data spaces. As you have explained, data is at the heart of what we're trying to do through the digital transformation of the local level. And so what I would like to show you through a couple of slides on how the European Commission is making the necessary steps through its policy measures together with the various stakeholders, as you have referred to make this really happen, to allow cities and communities to benefit from all kinds of data, as you have said, from data from all kinds of sources and data with all kinds of temporal attributes, past static data, but also real-time data. So how do we go about this? Current Commission policy, as you know, focuses on a number of key objectives. And in the case of smart cities and communities, smart and sustainable cities and communities, we really see that the two main Commission objectives around green, the European Green Deal, so enabling the European Union to be the first, or Europe to be the first continent to be climate neutral, and at the same time ensuring that Europe can be fit for the digital age. So these two objectives combined together allow or have really given a new momentum for the topic of smart cities, because they're really at the heart of this twin digital and green transition. If you follow the number of different strategies, you will have seen that both the digital strategies, data, AI strategy, the digital compass ensure that ICT contributes to helping this greening, but also work on making sure that the digital technologies do not do additional harm. But at the same time, all the green strategies, like the Zero Pollution Action Plan, like climate adaptation and so on, they also foresee how digital tools, and in particular the use of data, can really help achieve those objectives. And the local level has been considered as even sometimes more ambitious than the national level. What we do at the Commission in the unit, Technologies for Smart Communities, is to really help all cities and communities, so all those 350 million European citizens that we try to address, or at least those to benefit from the digital enablers, so generic digital enablers that would enable them to then profit from all those digital services that they can help to improve their lives. So focusing on, of course, connectivity and infrastructure, our main focus is on ensuring the availability of real-time, of quality, of necessary important data. We're helping to manage those data through interoperable open standard-based platforms, and then try and put on top of those platforms, using the data, some very powerful, impactful solutions, such as, for example, local digital twins. And we do that in cooperation with and driven by cities and communities and other administrations from all levels of government through the Living in EU community. That is a political, let's say, movement bringing together over now 100 signatories representing over 30 million European citizens for the digital transformation of cities and communities, so-called the European way, according to a number of principles and EU values, making sure that the usage of those tools will not lock cities into certain solutions, and also ensuring citizens' digital rights. At the same time, we're trying to help and benefit from all kinds of other infrastructure that the Commission is putting in place, such as testing and experimentation facilities for AI, or digital innovation hubs and others. Today's session, I will focus on the data layer, which is the discussion point for this session. What we have been discussing with cities is really the recognition that there's quite a number of challenges still related to having access to the right set of data, to the data that will help solve those challenges that, of course, each city will have very specific to their own needs. What we hear, or what we've understood from cities, is that it's difficult to access public data that is not often open. Could be sensitive data, so owned by the government, but not necessarily open. And also what we have seen is that there's been a great emphasis on the open data paradigm for more transparency, but a lot of the data that cities need is not necessarily open. And therefore, we've been looking at how to get access to other types of data held by citizens, for example, that could enable more personalized services, but of course, with the respect of the citizens' digital rights, but also data held by the private sector. We understand from recent workshops from cities that, of course, a lot of the very relevant, high quality, timely data could come, for example, from platform economy companies or from companies operating in the city, but they hold that data as a privately held asset. And oftentimes cities have difficulties getting access to that data and perhaps achieve through good negotiations to get access to that data, but it's very rarely, it's very difficult to scale this up at a European level. We also understand that data is still underutilized. Only about 70% of government departments' data has been opened up worldwide. And what we see from, for example, one of our projects has found this figure, which is to me quite still striking, that only 12% of city data is still only used for analyzing it for local decision making. At the same time, there's of course a lot of challenges related to governance, data governance, or organizational, legal, cultural challenges. There's quite some legal uncertainties. We're really hoping that the recently announced Data Governance Act and the forthcoming Data Act will put some more clarity into that. But really, all these challenges or still puts difficulties into creating portable, innovative, and especially cross-domain services. This is really something that we believe in smart cities and communities will bring huge innovation forward. And oftentimes the access to different kinds of data from different domains and mashing those together is still a difficulty. We've had an interesting study in the Commission at the Joint Research Center, and I've put this figure there, that identified a number of ways how to get access to, for example, privately held data in cities. But as I said, these solutions do not necessarily scale up, neither from the city side, because oftentimes the negotiations with the private sector or with data holders, utility companies go through each city one by one, but also from the private sector side, oftentimes they do not see how they can make available the data always in a different way, and they'd like to see a bit of a, let's say, combined demand side. As you know, the data strategy that the Commission has put forward foresees the creation of so-called common European data space. And the approach that was taken is to create so-called sectoral data spaces. So you will see or will have heard of the initiatives to create a industrial or manufacturing data space, a health data space, an agricultural data space, and for example, the Green Deal data space, as well as mobility and also energy and so on. These data spaces will basically create a secure environment where the currently fragmented data sets can be shared among those that become part of the data space under a set of agreed conditions and terms and references. Now, these data spaces will then eventually become part of a common European data space. So they will, at one point, all follow some kind of generic, will ensure interoperability among themselves, and they will also benefit from those infrastructures that the Commission is putting in place around cloud and edge and the middleware, as well as high performance computing, AI on demand, and the testing facilities. Now, the data for all these could come from all kinds of sources. This could be, as I said, public, private, personal data. And what will be interesting is to really the way we have identified that there is a need for smart cities and communities to have their own data space, because in reality, it would benefit from many of those sectoral data spaces with relevance at local level. What we have really seen is that a lot of that data will contribute to ensuring or coming closer to the objectives of the Green Deal. So I've made a dashed line between the Green Deal data space and the data space for smart communities that the Commission will support in setting up, because eventually a lot of that data that is used in smart cities and communities will contribute to that greater Green Deal data space. But of course, it does not limit itself to that level of data. It could be data with relevance for mobility or energy, public administration, and others. What we have seen and identified and understood from the stakeholders is that what is really important is to go by so-called demand-driven, use case-driven data sets. So the creation of a data space for smart communities will essentially build on the needs of the cities, of the local administrations. So how do we go about it? What we have been doing is consulting with experts, then with the cities, with the private sector and the many others. You'll see later a few links to past workshops. And I identified that creation of a data space for smart communities would probably have a number of clearly distinguished building blocks. Some building blocks around governance need to agree on roles and responsibilities, rights, how to ensure a secure exchange of data, and so on. It will have to have some building blocks around its architecture, around interoperability, essentially ensuring to reuse existing tools, building blocks, for example, the minimum interoperability mechanisms, but also solutions around interoperability for smart cities and communities, CEF building blocks, the forthcoming middleware, and so on. And eventually, depending on the use cases, identification of a number of priority data sets that would then be accessible under similar conditions across those that become part of the data space. Here I've mentioned a number of sources, but of course there could be many more. This could be city administration data, geolocation data, citizen data, data from utilities, data from local private companies, high value data sets. As you know, many of those will be relevant at local level, meteorological, postcodes, and so on, research data. And so the aim of this data space will be to bring together existing local data ecosystems and to identify common principles for sharing this data at EU level. And as I said, the way we support this initiative is through a number of past workshops and events. You see the links there at the bottom, and essentially European funding through the new digital program, which its first call has a preparatory action for a data space for smart communities. And later on in the second call, will allow to test and validate that data space and deploy it and allow it to grow further. It will focus on developing a governance scheme. It will develop a blueprint for the data space, then bring those agreed data sets in conformity with those principles and create a roadmap for the large-scale rollout and the further expansion of this data space. So that was my introduction. I hope that gives you a good overview on what we're trying to do in setting up a common data space for smart communities in Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Maybe already now there's a couple of questions. I don't know, should we just take them off the bat? I think then the next speaker can prepare. So there's from Gothenburg, Kim Land, who is asking, how can we help cities publish more data as open? So that's really the open part. I understand not everything can be open, obviously, as citizens and businesses, we have integrity. But how can we further that part? Because, so he says, 7% is not really much to innovate on and around. What can companies and citizens do? And the people working in the city. So I know Kim is a civil servant working for the city of Gothenburg there. So any advice there? Or could it also be that, well, we can only go so far with open data, then we need to tap into actually data sets that aren't so open. I mean, all open. Do you get the question?
Yeah,
there?
I think I think there's both answers to both, or at least there is a relevance for both. So in terms of open data, what we have seen now in the let's say the incentives to start opening up data, many cities created their own platforms and started to put data out there, whatever they thought was possible to open. But I wasn't necessarily following the real needs of those that wanted to use that data, and the data was not necessarily as useful or timely updated as it could have been. So it didn't really create the necessary demand. What we have, so probably the one way to go about it is what we've seen with other with cases where it was really a success, is when it was demand driven, trying to understand what those that would reuse that open data would really need, and ensuring that at least those data sets would be in quality and timely updated. But what we also see, as Martin really alluded to, is that actually a lot of the data that cities may need, or cities and those that will create services on top of that data, is not necessarily open. So we see a shift in paradigm from moving away from strictly going for open data to actually a data sharing movement. And I think this is really going to be the key also for the data spaces, on identifying what is the kind of data sets that are relevant, regardless of where they come from, and then coming into some agreement on how to access them under what conditions. And it may not be open to everybody, it may not be necessarily free for everybody, but there will be some agreement on how to do that. And what we're thinking is that if cities come together to actually agree on a number of data sets, then the win-win situation between cities and the data holders, or the data holders and data users, will be easier to come to an agreement on a win-win agreement on how to use that data. So that's why we're trying to bring together all the demand and essentially all the supply to be able to come to such agreements. Somebody asked about the middleware. I see, yes, there is an intention to create a middleware, and this is something that you will see also in the work program of Digital Europe. A data space can be, would it be a cloud, a portal? This is to be discussed and to see with the let's say members of the data space. It's something that certainly will not be a centralized data space at the level of the Commission. It will have to have some kind of course, interoperability between the local data ecosystems, a federation of those, and then you will need to see what makes sense on how exactly to set it up, and how exactly to get access to then the same kinds of data under similar conditions in the same format, right? Because that will also support or facilitate the creation of portable services.
Okay, great. We still have some questions, but we also need to leave some for the rest. Thank you so much, Andrea, again for the overview. We can certainly come back to everything. You will stay here and we'll have a room.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I welcome our next intervention, Lodewijk Noordzij from Eurocities. Of course, Eurocities has, together with OASC and ENNOL and others, been very active in trying to see how actually cities can do these things. So Lodewijk, you've not just been thinking about this. I mean, Eurocities has been since decades active. You have the Knowledge Society Forum and so on. So please share some thoughts with us, and thank you for being with us here today. I'm not sure I'm hearing you yet, Lodewijk. I see your hands, I see your slides. I don't hear your voice. Maybe, okay, so we should somehow see if you can, well.
My voice should be, I should be audible now, I think.
Yes, yes,
so apologies
perfect.
for this. Yeah, apologies for this hiccup. Apparently my MacBook doesn't allow me to share the slides on full screen, because I have a complete crash of the laptop. So I'm going to share the slides like this. So I'm going to just give me 1 second to enlarge them a little bit so that at least you have the opportunity to read them, or to read what's on there. Does this work for now? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for being here, Martin and OASC, for the invitation. Very happy to speak about the data space for smart communities here as well. Andrea also for providing a comprehensive overview and introduction. I just like to get back to the basics to start with, to provide some context for these data spaces. Why are we working on these? And in essence, you could say that it started with the European Strategy for Data, the communication by the Commission, which was published in February 2020. So that's already quite some time ago. The common European data spaces are mentioned in the data strategy as spaces that have rules and efficient enforcement mechanisms that should ensure a free data flow within European sectors. So whether it's business sectors, public sectors, academic sectors, the idea is to have these common data spaces where data is available for anyone to use and to reuse. And these data spaces should operate according to European rules and values. And in particular, personal data protection should be high on the agenda, according to the GDPR, which has been mentioned by them as well. And the rules for access to and use of data should be fair, practical, and clear. And this is a very citizen-centric notion that for at least the people using the data and the data spaces that they can trust that the data that is put available there is available according to the necessary safeguards and mechanisms to support these. Of course, this data strategy has a specific goal, and I think it's really important for us, but for anyone also to understand that a data space in itself should not be the goal. It's technology or data supporting specific targets and values that it should contribute, and it should, in essence, increase the potential for data sharing solutions to help meet the objectives for the Green Deal. This is also more specifically the target for the Smart Communities data space. That means that the data space or the Smart Communities data space should contribute to, for example, the mission for climate neutral cities by 2030, which is an initiative by the Commission as well and some stakeholders to create 100 climate neutral cities, or at least leading climate neutral cities by the year of 2030. While there's also a mission on adaptation to climate change by 2030, which has the aim to make 150 leading cities climate resilient by 2030. And for the Smart Communities data space, it means that, that the idea is that it should be use case or demand or value driven, which was mentioned by Andrea before as well. To make sure that the data that we make available, that is accessible, will be able to contribute to specific goals, but will also involve the necessary stakeholders to work on these projects towards these goals. There are specific fields and use cases related to sustainable mobility, but also climate change adaptations. You can think about, for example, cities and communities that have to deal with floods if they're located near seashores, for example. But there's also a lot of work on better energy flows with utilities companies, which are usually also undertakings with a public perspective there. Resilient urban infrastructure, where we also see, for example, a lot of work on digital twins. I saw a mention during the questions before here. And there are many zero pollution ambitions to which data and data spaces could contribute. So that gives a little bit of a focus for these data spaces. So where to start and how to prioritize the work and to make sure that they yield the results that we're looking for. Then the European data strategy also recognized some issues, or at least some challenges for data spaces, so to say. And although data is essential to facilitate data sharing solutions, actions towards the European data space should be accompanied by the development of sectoral data spaces. And of course, sectoral data space should be manufacturing, agricultural, health data spaces. And there's all these different domains that are trying to build their own silo data space, at least in the beginning, before they should be federated on a higher level. But there's also then the mention of a Smart Communities data space. But this sectoral idea, or this landscape that has different speeds and different characteristics, is not only applicable on the European level, but it's also something that we see within the European level on the different domains and levels related to the landscape of Smart Communities data spaces. There are many local initiatives, there are regional initiatives, national initiatives. So on the local level, we see, for example, individual cities working with their stakeholders, like universities or small medium enterprises, to develop insulated, so to say, or isolated data platforms where specific data sets are being published and reused for very specific use cases. There's also regional data platforms where, for example, utilities companies work together with the public to exchange data on utilities use, but also in the mobility sector. But there's also national levels where in the Netherlands, for example, you see that a local initiative by the city of Amsterdam using publishing and using mobility data for increased efficiency of road usage was actually scaled up to the regional level and then led to a national contact point for all kinds of data related to mobility. And this means that, that there is this federated perspective to data spaces in the European context. You see that data spaces or data platforms aim to contribute to different use cases, some of which we mentioned before already. They also use different approaches. So some focus on open data, others really, so that cities really looking at the data that they have and the public data that they should publish to put to the market to facilitate new services and products. But others, like in REN, the RUDI, REN Urban Data Interface, is really trying to include all kinds of data, so both open public data as well as public and private data. But maybe more important even is that they're working to include personal data as well, which brings specific challenges, but also opportunities for specific use cases. There's a variety of technologies where several instances use open source technology. Others take a proprietary approach, which then leads to certain architectural choices. And then there's, of course, the context-specific challenges where some cities have specific laws and regulation and policies in place that make it either more easy or more difficult to work with several parties. But it can also be a matter of demographics, of available skills and finance opportunities. So there's a lot of stuff to bear in mind there. Yeah, so these are the things that we need to consider in the governance towards a federated solution of local data spaces that lead to a smart communities data space on the European level. There are some cities considerations following the work that we've done with our members, but also in discussions that we contributed and participated in with the Commission and all kinds of other partners that are also present here today in the meeting. For cities, it's very important to ensure access, availability and quality of data. We see that indeed the availability of data mentioned by Andrea before is sometimes a hindrance for parties to work on certain solutions. But also the quality of data before being able to use any data at all. It should be about providing mechanisms also to ensure and assess the quality of data that's being put available, especially if they're used to provide public services or services of public interest. There should be a value for transparency by creating rules and guidelines to foster trust. And this is not only transparency and trust for citizens using the data or providing the data, but it's also about creating the right conditions for businesses to feel at ease to sharing or providing proprietary data for certain services. And this also leads to the next point where it's important in these helix ecosystem approaches where cities work with other cities and smart communities work with others to manage the value that flow from these kind of data space solutions. Then it's really important to define clear roles to make sure that the cities can connect each other's characteristics. And we should make sure that we involve citizens. So not in the first place, start with use cases and make it a demand-driven way of working on data spaces, but also make sure that the citizens are involved and that we hear them in how to create solutions that allow them to participate as well and provide their viewpoints. Of course, what does that mean? It means establishing a governance, a very comprehensive governance as well, starting, of course, with creating a community, bringing together all the necessary and all the relevant ecosystem stakeholders and players on the local and the national and regional levels, and also on the European levels? Are we going to develop brokers that maintain shared information on available data? We need to index the sources. We need to provide metadata and assess the data quality. We need to provide the standardized and technical solutions for data integration on top of the raw data that is available within the data spaces. Should there be a center to develop and manage common data exchange models? Do we develop the standardized contractual agreements that are standardly available and up for common use and reuse? What tools do we designate to manage the ownership? How do we go about with arranging the usage rights and digital assets on behalf of users? And these are all kind of things that, that we're going to try and catch into the governance, but also by using solutions that are readily available, already developed within all these different initiatives that we see on all these kinds of levels, and make sure that there is this standard go-to blueprint for smart communities data spaces, so that we can leverage and connect that what's already there, but can also support the implementation of new spaces and new data for those that are currently working on it or are making a start. And that's it for now. I'm looking forward to have a discussion and speak with you in the following.
Thank you so much, Lodewijk, and it's great also to see that you know, the big animal on the savannah, which is Eurocities. I mean, the big cities in Europe, both have, first of all, been following this for very long, but also has an ambition even to you know, act in the world, if you would want to put it like that, to try and figure out not just how does this work on the individual city level, but also on a network level, or you know, in between as an active participant. So that's really great to see. Can I just ask, just before we pass over to Andrea, so what do you see as the biggest challenge there? I mean, there's you represent the largest cities there, and I mean, obviously, if you're a bigger organization, you have more power to influence and also to, you know, resource innovation. So I mean, why do the biggest cities need anyone else? I mean, you could just go and you can, you know, knock on the door of the regulator and say, this is what we want. Boom.
Yeah, I think it's about coordination, and then taking advantage of each of these use cases and different domains in which we're working on. I mean, even if it's a bigger city, many cities have a specialty or they have a priority of use cases. And the thing is that these data spaces, they thrive on the idea that that the more data that is available and the more mechanisms that are standardized and coordinated, the better we can leverage the potential that is there. And this also means for bigger cities, of course, they might be able to do some of the work and leverage some of the value and some of the potential in their individual capacity, but there is more to gain if you look at the scaling opportunities, and by combining the expertise and the focus of several cities and the characteristics that are there, then again, dominant, to say.
Well, anyway, it's very nice that the big ones actually care about the smaller ones, because, and I think also what you describe is that there's a mutual benefit actually of all that are on the local level, whether it's big cities or smaller communities, rural or peri-urban or urban, actually have, you know, aligning agendas, because, you know, when things come to the ground, it pretty much looks the same, if you will. It's everything, and you cannot just go to the, you know, the big tech guys, or, you know, well, yeah, maybe your own national government issue if you're a capital, but further than that, you cannot really change the world if you want city.
But it's to add to that, and indeed it's in the workshops that we had with, and the conversations that we had with our cities, there's also indeed this perspective on the maturity levels of different cities. And of course, indeed, what you say, there's the larger cities, but there's also many smaller cities or regions and communities that would benefit from that what's being done by the larger cities as well. And it corresponds and contributes to the common agenda, which is then, of course, also the Green Deal, which the use cases that we set out in the beginning.
Thank you so much. I can see there's also also some questions in the Q&A, and Andrea, you have been busy at the keyboard answering. So this is actually a very, very interesting discussion also about how much should we align. So Ludovic, maybe we can come back to some of that. I mean, you know, the strong versus weak interoperability, how much is in common, what is minimal, and if we want really to, you know, scale quickly, how can we rely on what's already in the systems? Much more detail to come in a moment. Thank you so much, Ludovic, to you and the colleagues at Eurocities for being here again. So we turn now to Slovenia, and Andrea, very warm welcome to you. Well, you represent ICT Slovenia, but you're also very active on the international agenda. So trying to find how does this look from a European and indeed global perspective in the Gaia-X working group for smart city communities. So thanks for being here with us, and please share your vision here.
So can we see the whole screen or actually not?
I think you need to press the full screen thing. That would be better.
Not. Let me do it again.
Okay.
And first.
But we see you and we hear you clearly. And if it's not a problem, you can just, you know, the slides can just, you can just do.
Yes.
Fantastic. Yes, full screen. You have the floor. Please introduce yourself and take it away. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting us. Thank you for a great event. I'm coming from Slovenia. Actually we heard a little bit about the policy side, a little bit about the cities and municipalities ecosystem side, but I'm coming from the, let's say, digital sector ecosystem side. I will talk a little bit about Slovenia, how Slovenia was able to achieve a current state of play on the smart cities and communities area, and also a little bit about the work for smart cities and communities in Gaia-X. So actually, we probably all agreed that in digital economy, winner takes it all. And data spaces are really the key elements and really the key of the future European common market. So for Slovenia, I would say that we are the first country in Europe which requested its cities to use safe contact broker and apply MIMS when implementing their strategies for smart cities and regions. And also what really helps is how active was Slovenian government, high Slovenian government officials during the last half of the year when Slovenia headed the Council of Europe. Our Minister for Public Administration, for example, signed the Living in EU declaration on one of the introduction presidency events. He made intervention of numerous events specifically on the topics of smart cities and economies, on data economy, and how we really need to engage ecosystem and invest. This is the moment where we really need to heavily invest in skills and also in concrete projects. So how did we got there? Well, it all starts with vision, and I would say that we dare to dream for Slovenia to be smart cities and communities referential model country. We are small, and our digital sector, for example, is really strong, has always looking towards the international market. So it was really great interest also from the digital sector, who was driving the first initial, let's say, vision and mission brainstormings. The key was actually the open dialogue between the key stakeholders. In our case, it was the Ministry for Public Administration, who is responsible for this topic, also association of municipalities, of smaller municipalities, and also bigger towns in Slovenia, and us as a representative of a digital sector. And what was also very important, I guess, we didn't want to reinvent the wheel. We take a look, we did our analysis, and we see what is there. What are the European policies? What are the trends? Which initiatives are there? Which are mature? Which has the most followers among the cities and communities? And this meant a big jump start. And this also meant that discussion was not anymore about the bits and bytes, about how we will achieve interoperability. But discussion was raised to the level of solutions. So how we will use this data for, let's say, mobility solutions. This was really great because municipalities, well, they don't really care about the interoperability. It has to be like, you know, electric plug. Things has to work. They know, but they know what are their issues with mobility, with different vertical solutions. So this was really great experience, because we were able, since we put technology out of the table, they were able to talk about solutions, and they engage much more. What we achieved is we make that much iteration needed, that we would at the end came to the really acceptable common denominator for all the stakeholders. That was really important. We could reach for higher MIMS, for example, but we said, well, we have to have really common agreement where all stakeholders would feel comfortable with. So this was really key for example, our case. And what really made the difference was willingness to collaborate. Also, we prepared referential architecture, documentation, standardization, different kind of blueprints for them to use. So digital sector really step up and prepare this for municipalities, for cities to use, also for public administration officials to use. We did lots and lots of community awareness activities. We have great support from partners like, for example, OASC, team from Living in EU, from Fiverr, from GaiaX, from Big Data Value Association. We could quickly accumulate the knowledge and the good practices. This is why it's important to reach for partners. We also gained a political commitment of and together agree on a potential project. And of course, upcoming calls also helped. When money is on the table, stakeholders are more willing to talk. What's coming, we will see. We are entering the election year. Things can really change while this is happening. But what was really important for us was that really digital sector was also driver. They were for this interoperability story, because they're also always reaching for the international markets, and they were really interested in gaining, for example, approved solutions for smart cities and communities, firstly in Slovenia, and then ready, interoperable, polished sell to the international markets. And of course, it took a lot of determination, a lot of perseverance, but at the end, when you're doing big shifts, you have to be determined. Also, I think that Slovenia is a really small country, although we have around 220 municipalities and cities. Still, there is a central government, for example, and the discussions, the plans were because of that a bit easier for I think. I would like to talk a little bit about our work in Gaia-X also. At Gaia-X, together we create open, transparent and secure federation digital ecosystem. And one of the working group is also working on the smart cities and communities. We start working at the beginning of last year, complementing the national hubs. As you know, organization is with Gaia-X that we have a foundation, and then at the country level, we have national hubs who are kind of one-stop shop for the local stakeholders to get information about Gaia-X. But firstly, it's, let's say, a place where national use cases are discussed, developed, and then brought up to the European level to align also on the European level. We had really lucky because we quickly have a commitment and just right amount of very interested partners. So we were able to start to work really quickly. Our main ambitions and tasks were to build on already existing ecosystem. This was really important for us. We didn't want to reinvent the wheels. We wanted to start with what's already there and align. This was one of the first and most important, I would say, decisions we took. Further, we want to make sure that the work of the group was really well integrated in the Gaia-X organization. This is, you know, Gaia-X organization is really a young organization, and there is always issues when you are just starting. So this is a work in progress. We want to lay foundation for the European data space for smart cities and communities and bring together the logic of Gaia-X to the what smart cities and communities really need from that kind of for that kind of digital ecosystem. We want to prepare a position paper describing relations between smart cities and communities, domain issues, plans to the Gaia-X plans, for example, a referential architecture and things like that. Also the certification of the solutions. The document is structured like this. So firstly, we describe the Gaia-X and the smart cities domain, and then we follow with concrete use cases from 5 different countries. For you to get inspiration, maybe what could be done and how other countries approach. So we talk a little bit about the problem, about the solution, and the main technologies which, or Gaia-X components, which was used. And result is a published document. I put here also the link, so you could get it. I will also publish it in the chat later on. And maybe for last thoughts, I would like to talk a little bit about the data literacy also. In Europe, we are so lacking behind already on the basic digital skills, and to be involved in data economy, in future making, we could say we need people with digital skills. And then we need to upgrade these skills with the data literacy. You cannot expect people who would really understand what are the issues and to go for the projects like this, to work on the interoperability, if they doesn't understand the basics. So I would say this is one of the biggest issues we have. We must understand that with small municipality, they don't have people who full-time works on even on IT in general, not even on data only. So we really have to do a lot on the upgrading skills, digital skills, and the data literacy skills. So thank you for having me. This would be all. If you have any questions, please join also the Gaia-X working group. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrea, and thanks for the comprehensive overview. And I mean, so it was your minister, Koretnik, who was saying in the opening last year, also here at the conference. It's really nice to see not only how the ambition has been there throughout, how it was, you know, implemented and carried further in the presidency, but also how now you have been following up and you know, are leaning forward into the next steps. So thank you so much. So how do you see, just you know, we can come back to more questions, but how do you see the Gaia-X as a broad, you know, initiative in the world? I mean, is that something that we need to link specifically to all the efforts here, or is it, you know, one way of doing things, or how do you see this now that we are discussing how much is in common? So is Gaia-X becoming like the common ground, you know, across so many things, or is it one particular way for, you know, particular implementations are addressing these issues, if I can be so direct with you?
Yeah, I would say it's becoming the most important initiative. It also has a lot of political commitment because in Europe we are really lagging behind on digital sovereignty. And I would say this call of the Commission, and also at least big companies, big European digital companies are seeing this as opportunity to regain digital sovereignty. So I don't think this will go away. That this would be just, you know, a shining star, and then something else will come. But the most important, I would say, is that Gaia-X is not reinventing the wheels again. So it's aligning what's already there, talking with the stakeholders and building from there. And this is why things are getting further very quickly. And it's how the implementation will go. It depends on the you know, the sector.
Yeah. Okay, so that's good, and there's kudos from the colleagues next door in the chat. So thank you so much. Okay, thank you, Andrea. We come back to these things in the open part here, but I would like to give the floor now to Ulrich Ahle from the FiWare Foundation. But Ulrich, before I introduce you, really, I want to make sure that we all remember that there is also the opportunity, if there's people in the audience here who want to pitch or express their interest in being part of also joining these efforts around European data spaces, which of course are global efforts. So Andrea, you mentioned there's a sort of coordination action, but there's also a lot of implementation, which is both related to, well, data spaces, but also the local digital twins, and there's testing and experimentation for AI and citizen communities. There's so many things. So we thought that this session around the local data spaces, but also that the next session right after this and the break on digital twins and so on, if you can just in the chat say how you would like the floor, then the team can during the open part give you the floor for a moment, and you can just say, hey, we're here, we have ambitions and interest and so on. So this is also a way to ensure that this is like you also said, Andrea, it's an inclusive process where we get many voices, but of course there needs to be some kind of plan. But please consider this also an opportunity to raise the hand. And if you want, you can just put in the chat that you would like to make a short pitch. I mean, 1 minute. You can show your face to the audience here. I think it's a quite nice audience we have gathered this morning, midday, evening, night, wherever you are on the planet. So Ulrich, sorry for this little
no problem.
Service announcement. Thank you for being with us. You have also been, I can say, with us, maybe not you personally, but FiWare and the colleagues since the very beginning, because this idea of having some things in common and not just leaving that to the market entirely, but ensuring that actually it reflects on the needs, like Andrea said in the beginning, not just pushing technology, but ensuring that, well, then the characteristics of the technologies, they then fit the needs of local communities. So thank you again for being here, and please share your vision. I can see you clearly, I can hear you clearly, and hopefully we can also see your presentation clearly.
Okay, then let me try that. Good morning, Martin, and good morning, good afternoon to all of you, to all participants. And Martin, you're right. I joined this ecosystem only 5 years ago, but the history of OASC and also the partnership the FiWare ecosystem is even a bit older. Let me try to share my presentation and go into the full screen mode. And I hope you can see my presentation.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, so I'd like to talk about open source and global standards for local data spaces. And as we've seen in the previous presentations, I think we all share that our new digital life will gravitate around data, around digital twins, describing what's happening around us, where, when, and why. Here, as an example of the city of Berlin, where we are headquartered, but this is true for all cities, communities, villages, not only in Europe, but around the world. But what we also have to see is that this data, this context information today are very often still organized in silos within smart city systems, but also related domains like smart water, smart energy, smart lighting, up to smart port at the end, at least for those cities who do have a port. And our mission at FiWare is to break down this data silos, to make data available on data spaces, and then use this data by artificial intelligence, by big data analytics, to create smart solutions which are on the one side improving the quality of life of the citizens living in a city, living in a village, living in a community, and on the other hand to reduce the cost of operating such an organization. And just one slide on 5Air. What is 5Air? 4 components. First one is a framework of open source software components. So we are talking within the 5Air ecosystem about open source software technology. Second, standard for the exchange of information, so a standard API. Third, standard data models. And fourth, reference architectures for the different domains where 5Air is used. And on the left side, you can see a very, very simplified reference architecture with the context broker in the center. So this instrument, which is representing the digital twin. At the bottom or southbound, if we imagine this as a map, the interfaces to get access to the data coming from different sources, coming from sensors deployed in an IoT network, coming from drones, from cameras, from other IT systems, from social media. Also, social media is a very important source of information describing what's happening around us. And then on top or northbound, functionalities to process, analyze, and visualize this data, and to prepare this data for smart solutions in a city context, for example, for smart waste management, smart lighting, smart gardening, smart mobility, and so on. And we are working in a context of other organizations which are sharing the same vision. And our target is to bring in this existing solutions, the standards, the open source technology into a partnership we have created 3 months ago. And this is the Data Spaces Business Alliance. Working on data spaces, unleashing the data economy. And it is a partnership of 4 initial organizations: the Big Data Value Association, 5Air, Gaia-X, and the International Data Spaces Association. You see the frame around it is open, which is a symbol for the openness of this organization. These 4 are the initial members, but we are open for others to join this initiative. And it was signed on September 23rd last year by the 4 presidents. You see here Reinhold Achatz from IDSA, Dario Avallone, starting from the left, from 5Air, Max Ahrens, for the chairman of the board of directors of Gaia-X, and Thomas Hahn, president of BDVA. Our target is to come up with a common framework and to speak with one voice to the world to make interoperable data spaces happen, to join forces and to speed up the creation of real-world data spaces. Together, these 4 organizations represent more than 1,000 leading key industry players, universities, organizations within Europe and also outside of Europe. And what's very important, all of the 4 organizations have hubs in different kinds. Yeah? IDSA hubs, Gaia-X hubs, like Andrea here from Slovenia is representing the Gaia-X hub in Slovenia. And 5Air has 5Air iHubs, so-called innovation hubs, and also BDVA has hubs. So in total, we have more than 100 hubs, which help us on the one side to gather the local requirements out of the hub ecosystem, and also to use this hub for the dissemination of the results we are working on. And we created a 100 days plan. You see here a picture of the 4 CEOs of the 4 organizations. And we took the opportunity directly after the launch of this partnership, of this alliance, to have a meeting in Brussels, very close, Martin, to OASC, because also Gaia-X has its headquarters in Brussels at the same street. So we had a meeting in their offices to start to define the 100 days plan, which is described here in these different boxes, and I will focus only on a very few. The first important thing is the common data space framework and the common reference technology framework. So what is the architecture frame to create interoperable data spaces? Which are the different building blocks within this architecture? And then finally, which are the instances of this different building blocks? And I will come to one picture a bit or directly on the next page. Then, as I mentioned, the important role of the hubs, the different hubs. And it is important, as also Andrea from Slovenia mentioned, it is not our ambition to reinvent the wheel. It is more our ambition to identify existing building blocks which fit into this reference architecture, and with this to speed up the creation of interoperable data spaces. And therefore, this radar and maturity assessment of existing solutions and also existing data spaces is very, very important. And finally, which will be supportive here is also several calls within the Digital Europe program to create data spaces in different domains, and also the data spaces support center, which is quite important here. And this picture shows the different building blocks. This is the first version of building blocks which are within this architecture frame to create interoperable data spaces. And for example, data models and formats are very important, standard APIs, trusted exchange. So this topic of data sovereignty as a foundation for trustful data spaces where people are willing and organizations are willing to give in their data because they can trust in these organizations. And we heard about the MIMS so far, developed and implemented by OASC, the minimal interoperability mechanisms. And just to mention two examples, MIM1 exactly fits to this building block of data exchange API, or MIM2 are the data models, the smart and standard data models. And these are two very, very important instruments to enable the interoperability between data spaces and applications, standard APIs, standard data models. And this is a differentiation, and I would like to underline what Lodewijk also said in his presentation, that this interoperability can be created using closed source or commercial applications, as well as using open source software and open source technology. So open standards is one story, and this is the enabler for interoperability. And then it is a question how it will be implemented, using closed source or using open source technology. All these partners of the Data Spaces Business Alliance are committed to go into the direction of open source. So this is also true for IDSA, for BDVA, and also for Gaia-X. And we organized already just before Christmas a matchmaking event for the European data spaces, where also the data space of smart communities was one of 12 different areas we addressed. And we still have the matchmaking platform open on B2Match to bring partners together for these different domains. And the quick wins within the 100 days plan, and the first results will be announced next week during the 5R Smart Fest, which will be on Wednesday and Thursday. And then also starting with a series end of January. So an overview of the hubs we do have, a first draft of an architecture coherence between the four organizations. So the architecture for interoperable data spaces, a common data spaces framework, The radar is already up and running, so you can put in existing building blocks, existing data spaces into the radar, and then also giving deployment support to data spaces using these instruments. Yeah, and some of these ingredients are described in 5R white papers. For example, the 5R for data spaces, which especially for the data spaces part is very important and describing these different building blocks I mentioned before. With this, I would like to close. Thank you very much, and leaving us a bit of time for a Q&A and discussion. Martin, back to you.
Thank you so much, Ulrich. And yes, and I invite the whole panel to open your cameras, but first to you, Ulrich. So thanks for the concise overview and also showing how much has already been done. I mean, by quite a lot of organizations, and also, of course, building on years of policy. So what do you see? So you have created the Data Spaces Business Alliance, and now there's a very clear structure on which building blocks are there. Can I say what's missing? I mean, is it ready? I mean, is it later today? Of course, we will in the next session talk about digital twins, then we'll talk about the MIMS, how they evolve, and then we will have practical sessions with the companies, and several of those will be implementing what you just showed here. So what is anything missing? I mean, it sounds like everything is there.
If everything would be there, I wouldn't have been able to show this picture with the silos, because at the moment, still data silos are available. Not all data are available to be used in smart solutions. And there are different interests coming from different organizations, different companies, different countries. And there's still a big task to align on this. Yeah, and finally, we will come back to the minimal interoperability mechanisms, because these mechanisms are the enabler to create interoperable data spaces. And when talking about data spaces, I always underline the word interoperable, because it doesn't help us. For example, if we will create a data space for smart communities, then having a smart mobility data space, a smart energy data space, a smart X data space separated to it. So we need an interoperability between these different domains, because mobility is happening very often within communities, be it large cities, be it small villages. And therefore, this interoperability between data spaces is of utmost importance. And here we still have to go away to align on these mechanisms to enable the interoperability. And this is one of the mantras we are trying from the 5R side to bring into this Data Spaces Business Alliance, because looking back at our common history and experience, we figured out that standard APIs, standard data models, standard architectures based on a common data sovereignty framework are important to enable such data spaces. No? And by far, we are not there that we could say all this is done, it's happening, it's a real world. No, it is partly still a vision.
Okay, so thank you. So still some work to be done, but what you're saying is perhaps also that the technical side is increasingly being hammered out, and now, reaching procurement logics and so on. That's what we've been also talking about since many years, but it's a, chicken and egg situation. Okay, thank you so much, all of you. And thank you also now for opening your cameras so we can have a little bit of discussion. Again, I invite from the floor, if there's anyone who would want to pitch their vision, it's now you need to write. But there's actually quite a ongoing discussion about what is a data space and why data spaces. I don't know, Andrea, can I invite you to just reflect on that? I saw that there was a previous discussion also on this, but maybe we can take, so we have something like 10 minutes. So I would like to you know, become a little bit more firm on, so what's the nature of data spaces? Why isn't it just a lake or a cloud or, you know, a whatever? I mean, we do have data in the world. In fact, so I mean, I've done a little bit of classics, and I can tell you the very foundations of civilization is being able to record how much you have in store for the next winter and who owns what, so you can tax them. So it's not like we just invented data. It's always been the foundation of civilization, right? So that's nothing new. And the silos, Ulrich, I'm sure we've had for as long. But so what is the idea around a data space? It must be something different than just, you know, a ton of data. And then maybe we can also touch upon, you know, the levels of interoperability, because there's this discussion, how much should be, you know, really tightly, strongly linked in terms of data models, in terms of capabilities, and how much is you know, on a lower level or a lesser, weaker level of interoperability. So maybe that's two discussions that we could have a little bit of time for. So there was, Andrea, the question, a data space. So the Commission has come up with this idea, and as Ulrich says, well, there are vertical data spaces, and then there are a little bit more cross-cutting ones. So what is the good source, or what's the good answer to those who ask, what are data spaces if they're not everything we have already?
Indeed, so you could imagine this as a, let's say, secure environment where data can be shared. Similar types of data will be shared under similar conditions between those that become part of this data space. So it's kind of like a set of agreements that will bind those that are part of this data space together to allow for smooth data sharing from all kinds of different sources. And as mentioned, in the case of smart communities, this will be essentially all kinds of data from all kinds of sources, from all kinds of domains, indeed, to overcome this siloed-based, let's say, management of typical cities. And so what it will do is to allow the creation of a, let's say, federation of local data spaces, so that the cities, I'm just giving you an example from previous workshops, could get access, for example, to data from some platform companies or short-term rental companies under similar conditions, so that both the cities would benefit from getting access to that number of nights spent in that data under similar conditions, in similar formats, through similar data models, but also the companies will be able to provide that data in a much more effective manner. So we believe in these win-win situations will actually come to a much better agreement that basically will drive or will govern the data space for smart communities. And this will, of course, be following the needs of the city. So what kind of data you would need. In terms of interoperability, and I pick up on an interesting comment that was made earlier, what kind of standards may there be, for example, for digital twins. What we will see in the next sessions, in the third session today, is that yes, the minimal interoperability mechanisms are a brilliant approach to actually find the absolute minimum needs for different data models, for platforms, and to actually communicate with one another. And they actually give a really good guidance for cities to be able to ensure interoperability. Now, for certain areas, we may need to actually strike the right balance and find perhaps a list of available, essentially open standards that could then even create, let's say, comparative advantage in Europe to be able to ensure that certain standards are followed. For example, in the case of digital twins, where this market of digital twin city digital twin standards is still in its early stages. So it's again something for the next session where we will be discussing local digital twins to kind of bring it forward. So how do we go about it? I mentioned there is a project now ongoing that maps the current state of digital twins in general. We understand that there's discussions going on in various international fora on city digital twin standards, but we need to see and strike the right balance between being minimal and being very restrictive. And it's really up to the different cities to see what works for them most. I just want to mention another response that was in the Q&A, whether the data spaces will have to follow the FAIR, let's say, principles. Yes, that's the idea, and it will be coming forward more predominantly in the forthcoming Data Act. So to Tanguy Kunan, that hopefully answers your question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrea, and maybe Lodewijk, since much of what you have been doing from Eurocity side is really to focus on the governance around this and you know, following the chat. So what is a data space? Well, it's data. Okay, it's somewhere, of course, in a cloud or lake. That's not the point. It's the terms and conditions on which you have access to the data, right? So can you elaborate how do you see and how do you work with that? I'm afraid it has to be a little bit short.
Yeah. It's not necessarily so. It's the conditions. It's maybe more the common conditions and the common roles and responsibility, the understanding that you have as a player, as an actor, as a user, a producer, an operator, whatever it may be. The understanding, the shared understanding that you have of how to use this data and where you can use it and how you can use the data of the others as well, so that you create a space, so to say, a common space, a common playground, or a common definition of what it is that happens in the data space and who does it. So in that sense, indeed, it's also about standards. It can be also about creating trusted mechanisms, so that we all know that, okay, if you use this mechanism within this data space to use that data, you can, that you know as a player or a party what to expect. So it's about, and therefore it's also about coordination. And indeed, it's much, I mean, the cloud is just an infrastructure, a federated infrastructure on which we hold data, which we run stuff. A lake is a collection of different sources of data on which you can build analytics or data-driven services. But this doesn't say anything about different players, actors, and roles and responsibilities if you distribute all this data.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Lode. Just there was another question. So someone directly asked, so is Eurocities, engaging in this CSA bit, which is there? And well, in this Europe program, there's a couple of proposals that can be addressed. So do you want to comment directly on that?
So we are involved in a consortium to work on that goal. I think it was Luc who said it, and indeed, lots of the work that we do and the network that we represent is therefore for our network and for the members that we work with, it's a relevant goal. It's also something that we've worked on with our membership and other partners in the past as well. We will be going to submit a proposal. We work with several partners. But we have in that sense, we have a representative role. It's only a 1-year project, I think. And therefore, as a network, we represent the city's interests, and we will use our network, so to say, and our members to provide the groundings and the underpinnings and fulfill the activities. And this is also why we will be using or reaching out to all kinds of actors to help us in executing the tasks and activities put forward under the call.
Thanks. And I think we can echo also, I mean, there are many, there's also the whole Living in EU set of initiatives, and that mentioned many parts of the Digital Europe work program. So of course, we can also say here that, of course, as collaborating networks, Eurocities, NL, OASCs, and others have been, of course, working closely also to make the best for, everyone else, in fact, so that it can be an inclusive process also that we can leverage locally in not just Europe, but globally this effort. Okay, we're coming slowly to the end, but I would like one final thing that I think we should talk about here. And just again, Andrea, you've had these quite focused tenders or calls in Slovenia where you have invited, well, the national government has invited local governments to set up these platforms. Can you in 30 seconds recommend this approach? I mean, there's someone saying your next door neighbor country said, we want the whole narrative. I mean, there is some action needed both from the company's side, from the national government side, from the local side, from the international side. Can you just very briefly, say, have you learned that this is the way to go?
Yes, definitely, this is the way to go. Very important is, the beginning of the process. So the discussions among all the stakeholders and agreement. And then technology is off the table and we talk about the solutions, the innovations start to happen. Everyone is happy because the technical part is prescription then. Then they focus on the value.
Thank you also for being short. So we are at the end of this session, but we are at the beginning of the Sea by Sea Festival, and this is just opening the floor. Andrea, you mentioned the next session will be on digital twins. I think we should close here. I hope that you had, now at least dipped your toes or, gotten to the next level, or how can you say it? But stay with us. It will be the same channel. It will be, a single track work program we have here, but in 30 minutes, we will, I would almost say continue, but then focus on what happens when we have this data. And then we want to do the complex modeling and simulation and take decisions based on this, not just, individual services. So, thank you everyone for being here. I think we should give an applause virtually out in every corner of the world. Thank you so much, Ulrich. Thank you so much, Andrea Lodewijk and Andrea, for being with us and for sharing your vision here. We come back to you. I think all of your organizations are also in later sessions. You can see the program on citybicity.com. And well, see you soon. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.